So if I was new to cycling, these are the 5 key mistakes that I made when I first started riding, so you don't have to make them like I did. So if you're new to cycling and want to not make the same mistakes that I did when I first started riding, then I'm going to take you through the 5 key mistakes I made when I first started riding. So the first key mistake I made when I first started riding was not fueling enough. Most of the time I used to go out with just an electrolyte tab, or when I first started riding, that wasn't even available, so I'd normally go out with some orange squash, and that's all I had to do a ride. First time I started riding, I was doing some local charity rides of about 30 miles, but as I got more into cycling, that increased to doing more century rides, sportifs, Ironmans, triathlons, and one of the biggest things that I learned the hard way was not fueling enough. The amount of times I bonked on rides, the amount of times I had to stop and get some food or grab a drink at a gas station or a petrol station was far too many to count, really. So, and what I would normally do as well, I remember going out one of the first times with my brother, and we cycled about 60 miles, but we cycled 30 miles one way, 30 miles the other way, and really only stopped when we turned around for a coffee stop and a cake. And I had nothing on the way back. I was completely underfueled, and the final 30 miles on the way back were very, very painful and uncomfortable. And I remember that to this day, but just because I was really underprepared, not enough fuel in my body, and probably not well trained enough as well. So if you are starting riding, just make sure you prioritize your fueling, make sure you take more with you every time you go out on a ride. That's what I always do now. I'm always making sure I've got more bars with me. I've got good electrolytes and carbohydrate drinks that I now ride with as well. So I'd rather have more fuel on me than not enough, especially as changing weather conditions, it's going to be too hot on certain days. And then also making sure I've got a license I've got my phone on me or wallet to be able to buy some food or top up with some water or assist me on my way if I'm a bit short. So always be over prepared with your nutrition, and that will make riding a lot more enjoyable and a lot easier. The second biggest mistake I made as well was just really not training efficiently. So in order to get fit, I'd just go out on long rides with my brother. Most of the time, they would be too much of a stretch from what I'd normally do. If I was going out on my own, I'd normally do like a little circuit, which was about 30 miles, and I would do that quite regularly. And even then, I remember that was quite a challenge when I used to ride that. But then every now and then we'll go out on a longer ride, and a longer ride for me back then was 60 miles, 100k. Now that's most weekends. But at the time, going back to that previous story, when I cycled 30 miles out and then 30 miles back, because I was quite comfortable with 30 miles, I just felt it would be pretty easy to cycle 30 miles one way and 30 miles back. But the second half, I had nothing in my legs. My legs just felt like jelly. They were aching every pedal stroke. I had to pedal and spin and try to just spin on the bike and not even pedal because I was in so much pain and discomfort. I could pedal for a couple of spins, and then anytime there was a hill, just stop, or any momentum on a flat, not pedal, because I was absolutely broken, man. I remember that ride very vividly to this day. And it always reminds me of just making sure, like I mentioned in the previous point, that I'm fueled well, and don't underestimate certain distances if you've not trained for them. If you're training 100-mile sportif and you're only doing 50 miles in a bike ride, while grit and determination and mindset might get you through that final 50 miles, training to be able to ride 100 miles is going to be better in the long run than just thinking you're going to turn up and do it. You want to have the miles in your legs to feel confident, to enjoy the whole experience a lot more. If you're going in and not having done the full distance, there's going to be some point in that race or that ride that you do where it's going to be complete pain and discomfort. The same example is when I did the Ironman back in 2011. Didn't really do much riding that year, trained for the London Marathon, so I had quite a lot of running legs, but not cycling legs. And I just did 112 miles based on the fact that I did it the previous year. And the previous year I trained well. I did quite a lot of riding that year, but this time I hadn't done hardly any. My pace was slower than the previous year. Surprise, surprise. And then what happened, my back started aching, and it was just a pure pain all the way through that ride. I think with 40 miles to go, really uncomfortable. When I got to the aid station on transition 2, I went to the doctor to get some ibuprofen and some paracetamol, just trying to numb some pain in order to get through the marathon. But in the end, one taking that made me run one of the best marathons I've ever ran. So maybe there's a reason why people take performance enhancing drugs every now and then. But yeah, never underestimate the distance that you're riding. Even though it might not seem a lot on a bike, never underestimate it, because it will catch up with you. And obviously this takes me to my third point, is just learning to pace things. One of the biggest mistakes I always made, sometimes I still do now, is getting too excited, going off really hard. You feel really good and fresh when you first set out on the bike and you think, yeah, legs are feeling good, feeling great. But then you forget you've got 4 hours of riding ahead of you or more. And it's all good, feeling good when you set off. That's good. You're training pretty well, but you want to still be feeling strong and good in the last hour. If you're doing 100K, those last few Ks, you still want to be feeling pretty strong. So you don't want to be getting too carried away, going off too fast. For me, it was always being too aggressive on the climbs. I do enjoy climbing quite a lot, so I've always wanted to test myself and go quite hard on the climbs, but generally that would leave me depleted in order to keep up on the flat and then just struggle the rest of the way around. So pacing is another key element that if I was new to cycling, I would really, really focus on. It's really important to think about the distance you're going to be doing that day, how the ride's going to pan out, look at the elevation and the route. So if there's going to be some harder climbs towards the end of the ride, you still want to maybe save quite a bit in the legs for the harder efforts towards the end. If it's flatter towards the end and you've got more hills at the front, you might be able to be a bit more aggressive by going harder when you're riding initially to get over those climbs, if the rest of it's going to be pretty flat towards the end. So yeah, make sure you're aware of the elevation, the route that you're doing, just so you can sort of in your head try and pace it. If you've done a route before and you've done it multiple times, that also helps as well, because where the hills are, where you need to maybe go a bit harder, a bit easier, and where you've got a bit of relief to recover as well. So just have it in your head, a ride plan, just to what to expect, what you're aiming for, and what you want to get out of it as well. And then the next mistake, the fourth point I want to make today, is that I used to ride mainly at weekends and then expect, because I would ride most weekends, I would get fitter and stronger. At the time, I didn't prioritize riding much during the week. Time commitments around work made it a challenge, but I always felt that if I was going out every weekend, then that should be sufficient. But ultimately, I was going out every weekend and getting dropped or just coming back completely depleted because I just hadn't done enough riding throughout the week. And it wasn't until I started understanding that everybody that I was cycling with in the cycling club were cycling 2 or 3 times in the week, maybe commuting quite often throughout the week as well. So they were regularly getting their body used to being on the bike more than I was, where I'll be sat down at a desk driving quite a lot of my job and then just jumping on the bike at the weekends and expecting to have the legs to perform well, ride strong. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I've really taken on board in the last 5 or 6 years, is that riding consistently week in, week out, getting those rides in the week, at least 2 or 3 rides in the week on the turbo trainer, just makes my body more conditioned to cycling. So when I do get out on the weekends, I'm comfortable, my body's adapted well, and I'm comfortable doing those longer rides. So if you don't have very much time in the week, just try and find, if you can, 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a week, or to an hour, 30 minutes to an hour. That will make a massive difference. And you can vary those workouts to make them more intense as well, which will take me on to my final point. But just riding more often will make you a stronger rider. Don't expect to just ride once at the weekends, get a big ride in and think, oh, I've done 100K at the weekend, then I don't need to do much in the week. If you're saving all your miles to the weekend, it's like you're not working all week and then trying to cram a week's worth of work in the weekend. It's going to be a lot of hours and you're going to be exhausted and tired, and it's just not going to accumulate very well. Where if you're working consistently throughout the week, you can have the weekends off, or you can do a bit of extra work at the weekends to improve your performance. So think about it like that. Think about spreading out your training throughout the week rather than trying to cram it all in at the weekends like I used to do. And then my final point comes back to that point, is that don't just ride at the same pace all the time. If you're riding a lot on your own, when I first started riding, I was the only person and my brother really riding, and we wouldn't ride that often together, but it would just be me riding on my own. My friends started getting into cycling, few years after me. But when I was training for triathlon, I was very new to triathlon. It was still quite new in terms of the sport back in 2010, 2009, 2008. So still relatively new on the scene. Not so many people doing triathlon then, Ironmans, half Ironmans. So I was out going training on my own all the time. And while that was really good and I enjoy being out on the bike on my own, it's nice and quiet, nice sort of headspace, nice solitary time for me. It wasn't until I started riding with other people that I actually got stronger. And it wasn't until I also started doing programmed training sessions, an actual session on the bike that was going to push me to be a better cyclist, that I would get stronger. 9 times out of 10, I would just go out and ride, same pace, maybe go a bit harder on the climbs, but my pace would always be the same. I would look at my average speedometer and it would always be the same based on the distance that I did. Even when I was doing the Ironmans, the average pace was the same. I think back then I was averaging like 15 miles an hour for 100 miles. And now I can average about 22 plus mile an hour for 100 miles, depending on the terrain. So riding with other people that are better than you was one of the biggest lessons and key improvements that really helped me become a better cyclist. And then also when I got a training plan, when I had a coach before I started coaching other people, having a structured plan to get stronger significantly improved my performance in a very short period of time. I think I gained about 20 to 30 watts in my FTP within a period of 4 to 5 months. And that was just with more structure. And before I would just jump on a turbo trainer and then just try and cycle as hard as I could for about an hour and burn out, where now there's a structure to what I'm doing every time I'm on the bike. If I'm doing a program session, I'm going to do some intervals and do some sweet spot rides. I'm going to do some basic zone 2 efforts for an hour, nice and stable, keeping my power and heart rate in a nice controlled environment, nice and controlled zone. So there is a structure and a plan to everything I do when I jump on a turbo trainer, where before I was just jumping on riding. Every time I was going out on the bike, I was just going out and riding. And I still go out and just ride at the weekends now, but now I'm riding with people that are better than me, faster than me, and there's an element of trying to keep up. And when I started riding with the group that I ride with now, there was a rule that if you got dropped, you had to find your own way home. And I was getting dropped every week for a number of weeks. And then it wasn't until I started to understand how they were training, how they were riding, I started to adapt that to my own training. And then every time I started going out, I was getting dropped less and less and less. And eventually I managed to hold on for the whole ride. And now I can maintain quite comfortably with the group throughout the ride, which I thoroughly enjoy. And my improvement as a cyclist has come on significantly. So they're my 5 key takeaways today in terms of how I would go about making myself a good and strong cyclist if I was just starting out as a cyclist. Because if I knew all that information when I first started riding, I certainly would have been a stronger rider for my triathlons than I was, and I probably would have enjoyed it more rather than suffering as much as I did when I first started riding as well. So learning all those lessons, hopefully you can take some away with you in today's video and adapt them to your own training and your own style of riding. Let me know in the comments below if you've got any questions when it comes to any mistakes that you might have made when starting out as a cyclist, and any questions you want from me, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out this video here if you want to learn more about cycling.